Okay, so John, karibu sana. You may start by introducing yourself so that everybody can get to know you.
Hello everyone, I'm John Kiguru, a cybersecurity consultant at CyberOne Solutions, and I'm happy to be here.
So John, can you just start with a brief introduction of what vulnerability research is while people are joining in the session and preparing their questions? So I guess that is going to be a good starting point, and then we can proceed.
Okay, awesome. So the topic for today was vulnerability research, and on my notes, I noted that vulnerability research is whereby you take apart a software, you try to understand what it's really doing, and on that you can try to tweak one or two things here and there, and now reflect back to see what could go wrong in the code. So ideally what you are saying is get to know what this thing is doing, know how it's doing it, try to find a way that that you could make things go wrong. And in doing that, you're basically gonna report it back to make sure that you're making the internet a safer place. So in a nutshell, that is what vulnerability research is. And I hope you guys are curious to know more about it. Over to you, Karim.
Thank you very much. So, guys, if you have any question in relation to vulnerability research, this is your time, because these are, I think, intertwined topics with penetration testing. So initially you need to start with finding vulnerability, and then later on you do the penetration testing bit, which is basically exploitation. So guys, whoever has any question, feel free to raise your hand, and then you can ask your question after you've been, picked up. Or if you feel that you don't want to talk, you could also drop in a text on the chat, and then the mentor is gonna read them and then try to answer them as possible as they can. So yeah, guys, any question? Anybody who has a question for Mr. John? So for the guys who joined a little bit late, our topic today is about vulnerability research. So if you have any question in relation to this topic, please feel free to ask. So let me just try to shoot out the first question. So John, when we are talking about vulnerability research, what does it basically entail? Does it focus solely on vulnerabilities themselves? What do you look for, or how does it work?
Okay, so basically vulnerability research is a wide area, and it's actually a wide topic to start with. The main goal is not to find vulnerabilities, or rather it is the main point, rather the main goal of a vulnerability researcher. But again, if you look at it in another perspective, you may realize that vulnerability research is what builds up the whole InfoSec community. This is simply because once someone is carrying out vulnerability research, they not only get to know the product, but they make it better by communicating their research to the makers of the product. So the research may not necessarily be a vulnerability, might be maybe a tweak or something that is just not working as it is. Again, looking on the research may also yield out results such as maybe a product is meant to be just a normal calculator in your phone, your tablet, or maybe your desktop machine, but then you find that it's not doing calculation. It's actually maybe scoping. I am trying to find a better word to use here. So let's see, scoping is not the right word, but it's doing rather data exfiltration from your machine and sending it back to the makers. So if someone had not done that vulnerability research on that product, then the users of the internet would fall victim to this malicious maker of the application.
Okay,
So,
wonderful. And
okay.
what about vulnerability management? Is it the same as vulnerability research?
Not really. So for management, as the name goes, you're actually doing the management thing. So let me find a good example for this.
Okay.
So
Well, you're
management, okay, sorry.
okay.
I was looking for a good example. So for example, in management, you are doing like something like a continuous, maybe proactive and an automated process. You see, to keep your maybe computer system or network safe from a cyber attack or data breach. But when we talk about vulnerability research, here you are just doing the analysis of the integrity of information systems and maybe are doing that to just discover unexpected behaviors that may exist in the equipment. So let's break it down into few points so that the audience could understand. So when you talk about vulnerability management, we are saying here, we are doing a continuous and a proactive, maybe an often automated process to keep your computer systems safe from cyber attacks, okay? So maybe you may look at it from a blue team perspective there. For vulnerability research, we may look at it from an offensive point of view and say it's just an analysis of the integrity of your information systems to maybe discover unexpected behaviors. And this is where we broke it down and gave an example and said, someone may take a software, maybe a calculator application, reverse engineer it, and then hypothetically speaking, they find out that this app was actually doing data exfiltration as a side norm, not a norm, because it's not normal for a calculator to do data exfiltration, but it was doing it without your consent and then sending it back to the creators of the application. I hope I have broken it down to be understandable.
Yes, it was very clear. Now, coming to that, so does that mean that when it comes to vulnerability research itself, it's already a career as it is alone? And also, does it involve just basically looking for 0 days, or what can we in general call it? Or should I repeat the question?
No, I actually got the question.
Okay, okay, perfect.
So in vulnerability research, you may actually find a 0 day. So since you are dismantling the program, and trying to find new tweaks that may exist, the new unexpected behaviors that may exist in that program. So we may call it maybe something like finding 0 days. That aspect is in it. As it being a career, I see most pen testers and red teamers, they end up being vulnerability researchers for organizations such as the big ecosystems in our countries, such as the banks. So these guys are just deployed there to do vulnerability research on new products that are being made by those industries.
Okay, so basically, a vulnerability research also by itself, it's a role on its own, or rather a career on its own.
Yeah, an advanced role. You
Okay.
cannot you cannot jump into vulnerability research when you're not conversant with most of the norm in InfoSec
Okay.
community.
Yeah, that's very true. So we have a question from Hussein. He's raised his hand. So Hussein, feel free to unmute yourself, ask your question, and Mr. John will be happy and eager to answer your question. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the chance. My question is, the speaker mentioned well or differentiated between vulnerability management and vulnerability research. But when he said vulnerability management, he mentioned is as a continuous process, and it is proactive and automated process to keep from computer attack. But again, the key distinct from vulnerability research, this include an analysis of data or of exfiltration. So my question is, what are the activities mainly conducted in vulnerability management? This is it.
Okay,
Thank you,
awesome.
Hussein.
Awesome.
So
Sorry, continue.
no, I just wanted to give you the floor. So you may proceed.
Okay, awesome. Vulnerability management. So you're asking about the key activities that are being carried out in that task. That's a really nice question to start with. And what I can say is that there is a few key activities that are usually done in vulnerability management. So normally they say it's a risk-based prioritization, right? So what you'll do, some of the activities are end-to-end vulnerability management. Okay, sorry, I phrased that in a bad way. So you'll find solutions that do vulnerability management. And I don't want to act like a salesperson who is trying to sell a solution, but some of the key activities such solutions do is they actually have like built-in patching for new vulnerabilities that come up. They have continued visibility. They also do risk-based assessment. They integrate remediations of vulnerability and misconfigurations from a single console. So by that, what do we mean? We are looking at it from a perspective like, let's say we have anomaly as a tool. So this is a threat intelligence tool, but you can use it for vulnerability management in another aspect where maybe you're sharing IOCs, new IOCs that are like coming in. So you just say like these applications have been seen and it looks malicious and something of sort. So you share its hash. So what this will enable the tool to do it is it will protect every endpoint in the workstation, maybe laptops, servers, or virtual machines against such. It will also gain maybe a unified continuous visibility of your distributed IT irrespective of the endpoints whereabouts. Also, using the hash, it will automatically detect vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, or rather maybe risky software that is there. So if maybe the signature shared matches another software in the network, it will able to detect that. It will also now coming from now a sales side, prioritize the vulnerabilities based maybe on age, exploitability, and maybe impact. Other activities would be maybe the patch management as we talked about, and spotting maybe zero-day vulnerabilities and applying mitigation workarounds. Because remember, when a zero-day comes or rather is discovered, there may be not a patch in time for that. So you'll have to maybe do a workaround against that. And a good example was it in 2021 or 2022 when you had this GNDI host header injection for the log4j. So most people had to disable the logging because that logging system was the one that was making the GNDI call, giving the attacker a remote shell. And remember, like the logs were owned by the highest, the user with the highest privileges, because that is how it was set. So most people did a workaround against that by maybe turning off the logging, or like just giving it a user with really minute privileges before a patch came out. I hope I have answered you correctly.
Yeah, thank you. You have answered me correctly, but if I'll excuse, I'm getting a bit of confusion here. From those activities in vulnerability management, may I ask, if you won't mind, isn't any chance that vulnerability research is built inside the vulnerability management?
Oh yes, it's inside there. Comes in the bit of the analysis, so that you can now. Okay, awesome.
So vulnerability research is a part of vulnerability management.
It's a subset. So when you're doing vulnerability management, you must have an aspect of the research, so that now you can manage what you find.
Thank you for clarification.
Yeah, that's a really nice question, and has brought a new perspective. And I hope the audience has really learned from that.
Okay.
I'm sure they have. Hussein, thank you very much for your question. We have another candidate who has another question. His name is Muni. Muni, feel free to ask a question, and the mentor will be happy to answer it as much as he can. So Muni, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Karimu and Mr. John, for this opportunity. And my question is that in web pen testing context, as we begin our web application pen testing, at what starting point for finding our vulnerabilities in a web application? That is my question.
Pardon, I didn't get you.
So let me just help him. He's asking, at what point when you're doing web application penetration testing, do you start doing vulnerability research? I hope I got your question right, Uni.
Yes, that is my question.
Okay, awesome.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you. So this will typically begin in the initial stages of reconnaissance or scanning. And the reason being, I'll give a simple example. If you're doing a white box testing, and you find quite a fishy function that is being used, maybe there are like a family of functions that is normally pretty suspecting, like the eval in PHP. There's a family of evals, so you might find like exec underscore eval or something of sort. If you find it being used and you're not really understanding what is happening there, and you see that the user input maybe is going to the database, and then it's being loaded from the database to that function. Now from there, you might now do your vulnerability research by identifying that potential vector, knowing that your input will first be deposited in the DB and then brought back to that function. So in the developer's mind, he might not have pictured that information stored in the DB might cause catastrophic events if it was brought to that function, because in his mind, he thinks whatever is being stored in the DB is being sanitized. So if you find such a function, you might be able to curate a good payload that will be stored in the database. But then when maybe this data from the database is being used to maybe send an email to you, maybe that's where the function is being used. It will use that payload and execute it, and maybe you achieve your goal as an attacker. So what I'm trying to say here is it will start from literally the beginning. That is where you're doing like the information gathering, looking at the source code. In a case where we are doing white box testing. In a norm, I can say it will start with reconnaissance, go to scanning, now doing your research on what you're finding, so the vulnerability research. Then you'll do the vulnerability testing and validation. After that, you'll proceed with the documentation part and report it back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. John, for good explanation. But some of the challenges that I faced is when I reviews robot.c.txt or source code. All of those are one of the starting point. You can just review source code or finding a robot.c.txt.
So on finding robots.txt, I might say that is just information gathering, and all this information may help you to do the vulnerability research. Yeah, that's basically it. But finding it, that is not vulnerability research on its own. But now when you push or take it to the next step and maybe say you're chaining from the robots.txt, you found this code, and maybe this was code leaked from an internal function of the website. And then now you are able to get to that endpoint and do something else. Now chaining the whole thing, it will be now a research in itself.
Yes. John, thank you very much for the explanations. But what I can say, it's basically when it comes to robot.txt, it's basically a file which stores information about different, let me say, endpoints or different parts of the web applications that can be accessed or not be accessed. So sometimes you can find it, sometimes you can't find it because the system administrator removed it for security purposes. But most of the time, it stores information about the different endpoints of the web application. So for example, you'll find, let's say, a URL path of the system, the administrator, where you can log in into the backend as an admin. So sometimes system admins or the web application admin wouldn't want you to find those endpoints. Or for example, it will have paths to, let's say, different API endpoints. Now, probably the system administrator wouldn't want you to, get those information for you to, do different type of attacks and tests. So they'll hide the robot.txt file. So basically, the robot.txt file is just a file that contains information of different parts of the web application, but it's not actually doing vulnerability research per se. It's just going to help you in information gathering in a nutshell. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. I don't know if there is anybody who has any other questions they want to ask. This is your time. Anybody? You can just raise your hand and then I'll pick you.
Okay, as they find questions, I think I might have another example. I remember
Okay.
Tahafaruk last year. I know all of you are know Tahafaruk because he is in the InfoSec space of Tanzania. He was looking at this router and he was actually intercepting the request from the web-based side to now the actual firmware of the device. And he was able to find that if you just add a semicolon on the, what do you call this? You have a URL, then you have a page equals to something. So when you add a semicolon there and add a command, maybe ID, it will actually execute that ID command and return back the user in the router. So these are a really good example of a command injection. But now if you look at the whole process from where he started to what he achieved, now that's a good example of vulnerability research. So, and I think that's why they awarded him a CVE, because nobody had ever found that. So he just gave out the whole research to the vendor, and the vendor awarded him a CVE because it was out there being exploited in the wild and it was not known to many people.
Yes, and basically to add on top of that, it's basically when you're talking about vulnerability research is all about thinking of the unknown and also questioning things. So for example, if let's say you want to move from point A to C, you need to pass to point A, you start from point A, then you go to B, and then you reach to C. You ask yourself, what if I start from point Z, coming back to point C? What's going to happen? So doing the research, or basically vulnerability research bit, is basically you trying to ask yourself question, what if I do this? What will happen? What the vendor created this program to run in a specific way. What if I change the way this program is being executed? What will happen? So basically, that's the general essence of research in a nutshell. So yeah, anybody has a question? Anybody else? So should we just assume that everybody is okay and has understood everything in this topic? Because there are going to be questions and the labs that are going to follow after this. Huh? So just ask as much questions as you have in this topic so that you don't struggle when it comes to the labs itself.
Hello.
Yes, Brian. Shoot your question.
Uh, uh, okay, I had a question. Since we are dealing with web penetration testing, mm, earlier in the last periods, I asked a question about what are the preferable methods to use as a developer, or if I can rephrase it as a penetration tester, what are the most exploited methods? Like uh, I asked this question that we were
Okay, awesome. I also think this is a really nice question to start with. There are functions that are normally called hot seat functions. You know what is a hot seat? Yeah, you wouldn't want to sit on such a seat. So you would really want to be very careful when you're using such functions in your programs. So for example, you're coding in C, gets is a bad, it's a bad one. Don't go for it. Go for something, go for better functions like fgets or something. If you're doing web, these functions that execute commands directly on the OS, just avoid them or make sure you're sanitizing the input accordingly. And always make sure you're using the open source software such as Snyk, SNYK, to just scan your code, and you might be amazed by the vulnerabilities that you might find. It's a good step towards securing your code. Make sure you just scan it, and since you're not paying for it, I know there's an enterprise option for it, but on small code bases, I don't think they usually charge for that. So avoid the hot seat functions. Make sure you just use the open source tools to scan your code bases.
okay. And what about the usage of post and get methods?
Okay, now when you bring that in, it actually opens a wider way to view things. When you're talking about post and get, we're just talking about the way you as a client, or rather your laptop as a client, your browser as a client, talks to the server. So for the server to understand that this is actually a HTTP traffic or request, you must now use those methods. So for example, when you're talking about post, you're actually sending data to the server. So the web server will understand, oh, it's a post method. Now this person is sending data to me. For get, mostly it's used for retrieving information. So those are just HTTP methods, but they're not, in this case, they won't be really applicable when you're talking about not using them or using them. So for you to communicate with the web server, you need to use them, of course. I think the method I wouldn't encourage most people to use is put, unless you are really making sure you are authenticating who is doing the put thing on your web server, because basically what put does is to just takes the data from your request and stores it somewhere in the server. So I wouldn't recommend using that one.
Perfect. Thank you for that explanation, John. But also, in terms of the tools themselves, I remember when I was at GSEC, when I went to that conference, I saw even GitHub had, was it GitHub or Microsoft? Oh yeah, it was Microsoft. They had developed a tool that also does the same thing as the SYK. I think it's sync.
Yeah, sneak.
Yeah, snake. Yeah. So it does the same thing, and it was quite impressive because I think it was doing the vulnerability let me say scan on the code itself. So I think that's also a nice tool to go for. They've even uploaded it on GitHub, but I'll have to go and check what the name it's called, and then I'll share with the mentees on the WhatsApp group for you guys to go and do further research on the tool and play around with it. Though it's proprietary, so you have to pay for it. Unfortunately, it's not free, but hey, it's a good tool to know. Is there anybody else who has a question for John? Anybody? Before we call it a wrap. Okay, so let's make it a little bit more open, since I think the topic is a little bit, complicated. So whoever has any question in relation to everything that we have done up to now, or just had a burning question that they wanted to ask a cybersecurity expert, but they never had the opportunity to do so, then feel free to ask John any question in the domain of cybersecurity. I'm sure he's going to answer most of your questions. So also feel free to ask. Well, I guess, John, there is no questions for you. So I guess it's safe to say that we have ended today's session. And we are really grateful for you, spending your time with us and just taking the candidates through this important topic of vulnerability research. So guys, thank you very much for attending this session. John, if you have any closing remarks, this is your opportunity.
Okay, I was waiting a question on where do we learn on vulnerability research. Mostly, one site I like is learnvulnerabilityresearch.com. I think I'll share that with you on the chat. Let's see. Yeah, I like this site, and it's just a good way of learning how people do their stuff. Yeah, so this will mainly focus on the low level stuff. It's quite a huge take when you're a beginner, but it's also a good start to just see an overview of how people do the research thing. Now you don't need to really focus on how they're like finding things here. You just need to understand, like, or rather just see their methodology, something you can steal from there and maybe incorporate in your methodology. So as a closing remark, vulnerability research sounds like a lot of truth, and it feels like courage from an attacker point of view, but you need to understand that truth and courage aren't always comfortable from a perspective of the person who now you are reporting to, the vendor or the blue team person. But again, truth and courage are never a weakness. So as an attacker, you need to embrace them. And as a developer, you need to embrace them too. You need to know that when someone is reporting something to you, it's a chance for you to make the product better. Yeah, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for quite an impressive closing remark. So guys, in the next few, let me say, hours, your labs will be ready. We're going to give you an announcement on the WhatsApp group once the labs have been uploaded, and also the Q&A. Also, the recording is going to be available. We'll also update you on that in the WhatsApp group so that we all can be on the same page, especially for those who didn't manage to attend this session today. So guys, thank you very much for being with us here today. And once again, John, thank you for spending, this time with us and taking us through vulnerability research. So guys, thank you very much. Take care and have a great day. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.